Somewhere in the American West, there is a stream that swallowed millions of dollars. Engineers came with concrete and rebar and built check dams to slow the water and hold the soil. They straightened the channel, lined the banks, ran the numbers, and then the water did what water does. It found the weak seam, undercut the concrete, and tore the whole expensive thing apart, leaving a cracked gray slab in a dry brown gully. A few valleys over, on a creek nobody funded and nobody engineered, the water was calm and green and spread wide across a living floodplain. The thing holding it back was a tangle of sticks and mud, built by an animal that weighs about 30 pounds and works for nothing. Nobody saw it coming, because nobody was looking at the rodent. For most of the last century, this animal was the problem. It flooded roads and drowned fields, so we called it a pest, and we trapped it, and we built machines to do its job instead. We spent fortunes doing worse, the exact work it had been doing across the continent for free. This is the story the engineers did not want to tell. The story of how the North American beaver outbuilt the people who replaced it. So look at what a beaver dam actually does, because it is not a pile of sticks. When a beaver dams a stream, it slows the water and forces it sideways into the floodplain. That water soaks down and lifts the water table, the hidden reservoir under the ground. United States Geological Survey scientists measured this in Rocky Mountain National Park in Colorado. They found beaver dams raised the water table at both high water and low water, and held back the usual summer decline across a wide stretch of the valley floor. In plain terms, the beaver banks water underground in the wet months and pays it back in the dry ones. A single rodent doing groundwater recharge that hydrologists give whole careers to, and there were once a lot of them. Before Europeans arrived, the best estimates put the beaver population of North America somewhere between 60 and 400 million, their dams and ponds covering more than 300,000 square miles. The continent was plumbed by beavers. Green, wet, sponge-like valleys held water through drought and slowed the runoff that carves canyons. Then came the first villain. It started with a hat. Beaver underfur is covered in microscopic barbs, and those barbs lock together into a dense, water-shedding felt that no other common fur could match. In 17th century Europe, that made beaver felt the only acceptable material for a fashionable hat, the tricorn and, later, the tall gentleman's top hat. Demand exploded, and the beaver became money on four legs. Trappers worked the continent for nearly 3 centuries. The fur was scraped, treated with a mercury solution to raise the barbs, and pressed into felt by hatters, who slowly poisoned themselves doing it. That is where the phrase "mad as a hatter" comes from. But the madness was downstream. By 1900, after all that trapping, the beaver population had collapsed to roughly 100,000 animals, less than 1% of the conservative estimate of what had been there before. And here is what almost nobody connected at the time. When the beavers vanished, the water vanished with them. Dams blew out, ponds drained, water tables dropped, and lush valleys hardened into dry channels. We did not just lose a fur animal, we unplumbed a continent. So, when those streams started failing, when the West got drier and the floods got flashier, we did the most human thing imaginable. We decided to fix it ourselves. That is the second villain, and it is the one that should make you angry. For 100 years, engineers and agencies treated the beaver as vermin while spending public money to do its job badly. They channelized streams into straight ditches. They poured concrete check dams. They ran restoration projects that, according to Joe Wheaton at Utah State University, commonly cost about $500,000 a mile. And for the higher-tech engineered approaches, anywhere from $600,000 to a full $1 million a mile. Hard structures that needed maintenance, that silted up, that cracked, that washed out in the next big flood and had to be rebuilt. And the animal that would have maintained all of it for free, repairing every leak the same night it heard the water trickle, was still being trapped as a nuisance. We tried so hard to relocate them that in 1948, Idaho actually parachuted 76 beavers out of an airplane into the backcountry in wooden crates. 75 of them survived the drop. The lead animal was named Geronimo. We would rather skydive a beaver into the wilderness than let it build a pond near a road. But while the engineers were pouring concrete, a quiet body of research was forming that would humble all of it. And it started with fire. A scientist named Emily Fairfax had a simple question. When a wildfire roars through a valley, does the land around a beaver pond burn like everything else? So she pulled satellite greenness measurements from 5 large wildfires across California, Colorado, Idaho, Oregon, and Wyoming, and compared the streamside vegetation in places with beavers to places without. The result was almost hard to believe. The riparian corridors with beaver dams were about 3 times less affected by the fire. In the areas without beavers, the streamside vegetation lost on average 51% of its greenness. In the areas the beavers had soaked, the loss averaged just 19%. The fire reached the beaver wetland and simply could not get a grip because the ground was too wet to burn. Picture what that means on the ground. During the 2021 bootleg fire in Oregon, one of the largest in the state's history, a fire that burned for more than a month across an area more than twice the size of New York City, there was a stretch of Dixon Creek with about 8 beaver dams on it. While the forest around it turned to ash, that beaver stretch held roughly 5 acres of green, a wet island in a sea of black. And inside that island, the things that cannot outrun a fire, the fish, the frogs, the birds, the small mammals, had somewhere to survive. Fairfax has a blunt way of putting it. Beavers, she says, are firefighters. And the most astonishing part is the price. A single beaver family can protect several miles of stream this way, with almost no money and almost no human labor. Try buying that fire break from a contractor. So, the obvious question arrived. If we cannot bring back enough beavers fast enough, can we fake them? Wheaton and his colleague Nick Booz built what they call a beaver dam analog, a low lattice of wooden posts and woven branches stuck into a stream to mimic the real thing and lure beavers back to finish the job. The cost of this low-tech work runs about $50,000 to $100,000 a mile, roughly 1/10 of what the concrete costs. And unlike the concrete, it heals itself, because once the beavers arrive, they maintain it for free. The results read like a correction notice to a century of engineering. On Bridge Creek, in Oregon, where NOAA scientist Michael Pollock helped install these structures, juvenile steelhead production jumped 175% in just 4 years compared to a control stream. Beaver activity went up roughly 8-fold. The animals added about 115 new dams. The creek's underwater area tripled, and its side channels grew by more than 12-fold. Habitat that managers expected would take a decade to form appeared in 1 to 3 years. In the Methow Valley of Washington, biologists started catching the very nuisance beavers people wanted gone and relocating them to broken headwater streams. 19 sites later, those beavers are storing hundreds of millions of gallons of water. And in the high desert of Nevada, on Susie Creek, a creek that had shrunk to a thread on a barren gravel bar now runs year-round and holds around 150 pairs of beavers after a biologist named Carol Evans simply changed the grazing so the willows could grow back and the beavers could move in on their own. Which brings us to the question I cannot stop turning over. How did the animal we nearly exterminated, the one we spent a century calling a pest, end up outbuilding our best engineers at 1/10 the cost? And if that is true, here is the harder part. Do we keep paying contractors $500,000 to $1 million a mile for stream work that a 30-pound rodent does better and for almost nothing? Or are there still places, next to cities, below hydropower dams, beside someone's home, where only human-built infrastructure will do the job, and the beaver cannot? Because there is another side to this. Ask the rancher whose driveway floods, and whose field drowns when a beaver moves in upstream. To him, this animal is not free infrastructure. It is an expensive problem with teeth. Is the beaver a public utility or a private nuisance, and who gets to decide? Here is where the story lands. The beaver is back. From that low of about 100,000, there are now somewhere between 10 and 15 million across North America, a 100-fold rebound. And the same agencies that spent a century trapping it as vermin are now writing checks to bring it back and begging it to build. The pest we couldn't get rid of fast enough turned out to be the engineer we couldn't replace. The concrete cracks and washes away. The sticks and mud, rebuilt every night by an animal working for nothing, are still holding the water. So, I want to hear it from you. Was it the beaver that failed us, or was it always the other way around? Tell me in the comments.